That's our. Okay, great. Sorry about that.
No problem. So in preparing, the picture on the left is my brother, 3 years old, and me at 5. We're at the base of Mount Philo. My mom took that picture. She was actually like had a camera, got the light right. There's some things that I just want to point this out, wearing mud boots. It was mud season. My brother's rocking a Ben and Jerry shirt, like we were, I think, like ready to go. This is a picture of me in front of my childhood home in North Ferrisburg from last week. We were actually skiing at Jay last week. It just happened to like work out that way. That's for my wife. And the site was like funny for me to put together because it's like, that's all true, but when we were driving from Albany to Vermont, I played lacrosse at the University of Albany. We were going to Burlington and I stood up on the bus with 40 guys. I was like, that's my house from where I grew up, like when I was little there. And like one of the guys was like, shut up. You were never little, sit down. So, like little me, big me, I still feel young at heart. I have a family, wife, 2 little girls. This is a picture from Jay. This is my daughter Grace. That was our first chairlift ride. So Vermont is not first skiing. She's kind of over the magic carpet, can't really ski yet, but she's like, I want to get up in the air, go have fun. But that's just to say, I kind of, it's been a journey for me. So I met my wife in Saratoga. She ended up moving down to the city. My girlfriend, I followed her there. I went back to get my master's, focus in sustainability, specifically architecture, urban design. So we worked with the city of Newark. This was one of the projects we worked in our architecture studio. This is 2011, 2012. I was really focused. I wanted to make a contribution, like take a meaningful look at, I have an urban planning background. I like urban design, and what occurred while I was at grad school was what I think that everyone here is familiar with. Hurricane Irene hit the city of Hoboken where I was living. We had 6 inches of rainfall. It was catastrophic. And then the next year was Superstorm Sandy, which was a different type of storm event. Storm surge is different than rainfall. And that recalibrated the entire community's understanding of what we were up against. So there was a very distinct idea of what the community was. And then you have 2 storm events and the community has to shift the idea of what it may have to become. And I like this picture because I think the juxtaposition of the sailboat on the waterfront walkway and the, whoever came up and did the graffiti is like, it's kind of powerful. If you look at it and think about this image being 10 or 12 years old, when I don't know if the lexicon was the same back then, or if the storms and these issues are at the forefront of people's minds. But for Hoboken, it was. So I call this guy airbed legend. I don't know. Like, if you're critical about this picture, it's the improvisation that occurred to get an airbed in the floodwater, and like he's getting a safety. That's the important question. That's a snow shovel.
Yeah.
Because you do not have any kind of propulsion, and that's sewage, gasoline, water. So like, I think that this picture is kind of sad to see, but it's also like, I give this guy a lot of credit. I've never seen him again, but this is what my block looked like during Hurricane Sandy. Grimaldi's is my favorite pizza place. You're gonna get a whole pie and a half a carafe of wine for $30. But that's the National Guard evacuating people who didn't have the means to evacuate or leave floodwaters. And I'm gonna have to catch myself up in my notes here, but what happens during natural disasters, like everyone kind of bands together, but you have to take a step back. I think Michael mentioned this, 60,000 people, 1 square mile. We are not in a position where we can just elevate buildings or do buyouts. We needed to address the entire community. And to do that, like just to look at this picture, you've got one of our firehouses is in there. You've got masonry connected buildings. At the end of this picture, all the way down at the end is Lackawanna Terminal. That's heavy rail, light rail, ferry, subway, It's a major transportation point. One block to our west is our substations. So we had to really rethink how we were approaching flood risk management, urban development. And that's where I walked into City Hall and I was like, I've worked on this stuff before, I'm studying it, I will work for free. So I actually started as an intern at the city of Hoboken, just helping in disaster recovery. Now I'm in the business administrator's office and we have 600 staff members and $122 million budget. So kind of worked in every position, just trying to get a focus on how we adapt, how we recover. And I want this group to think and give that context like optimistic. This is Hurricane Henri in 2021. What you might notice about this picture, we've got like 6 inches of water on. There's dry parts of pavement. There's not a lot of people walking around or in the floodwaters. And this is an image from our community, Hurricane Ophelia 2023. So I know that there was a lot of flooding in Vermont last year. I know that there was a lot of impacted communities. And so from 2011 to 2023, we're going from, constant flooding, severe flooding, hundreds of millions of dollars of damage, thousands of businesses and residents impacted to basically flooding limited to a single tide cycle duration. So the statistic that I want to leave you with is our projects will be done in 2027. Right now, we can address 90% of rainfall events through the practices that we're going to go through. By 2027, we'll be able to address 90% of coastal flood risk in the community just by the interventions and policies we've developed. I thought it was really important. So this has got to be slide 16 or 17 here. To actually put this in the context of Vermont and some of the difficult conversations that we went through. The point of this slide is it's a calibrated question. So we do not all share the same sense of reality as much as I'd like to think that we do. There's differences of political opinions, like you name it. And so the question is the risk real? This is a conversation we had with our community. And so we use facts and data to kind of investigate that issue. So this is a list of disaster declarations from 2011 to 2021. And the federal assistance that the state of Vermont's received during that same period. I think that there are very, very specific questions that we need to ask as it relates to, is the risk real? Study by the University of Vermont predicts 5.29 billion in flood damages along the Winooski River in the next century, affecting over 100,000 Vermonters. This is from Hurricane Henri, like how long's our memory? Did this happen? These aren't all necessarily questions that get like a positive yes to. And when we walked through this, like you saw the pictures I started with, did this happen? Do we agree there's flood risk? Those are all kind of things that are complicated. It seems like it might be simple answers, but it's difficult. I think that this question has to do with probability, recurrence, frequency. It has to do with like, what is your mental model of the likelihood of something that's severe happening again within the community? And is that such an important question to answer that should we do nothing? So when we spoke to our community, that was kind of a question that came up pretty often, actually. And the answer to that was usually no. No, we don't want you to do nothing. We think you should do something. And I think that by giving the community the agency to say no, they're like, that's kind of direction. It's not simple direction. There's always a no action alternative when you're comparing projects against something. But it gets a little sticky when we answer the question, should we do something? That gets into the who, what, where, when, why. And it gets into site-based solutions. I use this picture because I think I like skiing. It's like what are you doing? Hopefully someone in this room, maybe Mary Ann and I, met a minute ago, will know how to address some of these climate-related impacts. This is a little tougher to read. Climate change-induced extreme weather is disrupting Vermont's $1.6 billion ski industry. And the statistic is that winter temperatures of Vermont may reduce the season by 30 days. So I don't have an answer to this question. It's just what I'm trying to do is kind of think about what the challenges are and how maybe we address them. In doing my research, I noticed that Barry is doing a program right now with buyouts. I don't know, is anyone here from? So buyouts are really difficult. It's something that Hoboken hasn't done successful. My wife asked me, she's like, were you surprised by anything? I was like, pretty surprised. It's a very progressive policy, actually. It's very difficult to walk into someone's house and be like, hey, you might want to move. Or like maybe people are volunteering, but it's a extremely personal conversation to have with someone. And I think that there's a lot of examples of what is going well in Vermont. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to leverage different issues into something that maybe is what I would consider to be ground, like you have a foundation. Like are the things that you can build off here that help you move in the direction that you need to. I came across this also, which is like a redevelopment plan, I think. Do you have any updates? Is that like still live? Maybe?
That's not the governors.
Governors. So the reason why I use this as an example is, and that's a great response. Our projects have been built from local representation up to the state and federal level. They were not dictated from the federal or state level down. And so what I think that this is a site, what I consider to be a site-specific intervention. The questions that I would have, and I think just based on what you said, how does this impact downstream development or floodplain in the watershed? What's contributing upstream to this site? Is this the best and highest use for the site? Like, how does this relate to hydrology and hydraulics within the floodplain? Is it an element of a master plan? Is it standalone intervention? And so I don't think that we need to debate it, but like when you get into the like, what should we do or should we do something? There's going to be a lot of different ideas. And what I'm going to go into is structuring them in a way that is related to like a common goal. And I stop on this slide because our community, through a federal program, received $230 million to build the projects that we discussed today. Since then, we put another about $400 million into those projects. So a total of $600 million. And at this point in time, this is 2015, there was a petition from the community after we received federal monies, not Hoboken taxpayer dollars, to stop the project. And so this is a little bit in the weeds, but say no to option A, stop Hoboken from building a wall that doesn't protect all residents. What this doesn't say is that the reason why this petition was started is because we were building on a residential street called Garden Street. And the reason why they didn't want us to move forward with the project is because they didn't want us to build in a residential area. There's only 3 places you can build flood risk interventions: in the water, on the waterfront, and inland. In the water and on the waterfront were too expensive for our project budget and too impactful. So when we moved inland, that lowered the design elevation and the height, and also meant we had a financeable project, but a small group of people didn't want to see it. So 742 people signed a petition calling for Mayor Zimmer's job, my job, the head of our director of Office of Flood Risk Reduction. It's our DEP. I think you guys have DEC here. It gets kind of complicated. And if you just bear with me for 1 second, I think that where we're headed is we ask really specific questions to the community, and we are citing these, and I just don't want to miss them. Can we limit the duration of a flood event? Can we decrease flood extent? Can we limit flood depth? Can we limit duration of disruption? How long does it take to recover? Can we limit flood damage? Or how long it takes to fix what we know may break and flood? So with that in mind, going into the next of this, all these other We prioritize and execute on a comprehensive plan that include our capital plan. We worked with our state I-Bank partner to leverage the federal funds we received. But I think that it's important that we kind of start from the beginning of where we were so you can see where we are now. 1868, this is Hoboken. It's this little marshy, wharfy nothing on the west bank of the Hudson River. This is a defining geologic feature, it's the Palisades. Manhattan is obviously across the river, built out. But the reason why this is the pre-existing hydrology of Hoboken was like not good. And then they just decided to fill it. And they were like, we'll see if it works out. And it kind of did. You may not know this, Hoboken was the point of disembarkment for World War I. So heavy industry, heavy waterfront development. I think the saying was like heaven, hell, or Hoboken. Hoboken was kind of not that great back then, but so 1865 marshlands, wetlands, 1908 World War I, 1955 commercial, industrial. So we have contaminated soils, low built waterfront, like wood piers. I'm not talking about like highly designed, heavily engineered. I'm talking about like a working waterfront. So over that 100-year span, you have rapid industrialization. From 1955 now to, this is like 2020 or something like that. Let's just call it another 50 years. Hoboken took an approach to kind of reclaim the waterfront for the purpose of recreation and open space. Now that doesn't modify flood risk. It just simply preserves a waterfront area for the community to use. And we've been successful over about the 1.25 miles of acquiring properties and redeveloping them for the purposes of open space and recreation. That still doesn't address the water. So we have this great waterfront asset. We have views of Manhattan. You can look down at World Trade Center and Hudson Yards, and New York City's on the other side. So our greatest asset is actually our greatest point of vulnerability. So in going from what happened during Sandy, Irene, to where we need to go, we needed to do a system-wide characterization. So there was 2 points that the city flooded from at the north side and on the south side. There is another area on the west side of the city that's vulnerable to flash flooding from rainfall events. So at a very, very high level, we began to categorize vulnerabilities and our risk profiles associated with not just hurricanes, but tropical storms, extratropical events, nor'easters. And what that looks like when you overlay that on our municipal grid, more than 75% of the city of Hoboken is in the coastal floodplain, which is problematic for a number of different reasons, and it generates a whole different risk profile than what may be in the Winooski Valley. But what we also have is rainfall flooding hotspots on the west side in darker blue. And those 2 different risk profiles generate like a great deal of liability. So I'm not sure if everyone can read, but our tax base is roughly $12 billion. The National Flood Insurance Program insures $2 billion. The floodplain is about 3/4 of the city, so let's call it $8 billion of ratables, which means there's a delta of $6 billion from exposure risk versus the actual protection. So we pay $8 million a year. So that's money just going out of our pocket to the federal government for nothing other than insurance. But insurance caps at $250, and a lot of these properties are worth 4, 5, 6 times that. And so you have a big delta now, and then when they issue new flood maps and the risk rating changes in FEMA, we're going to have an escalation that we think annually is going to be somewhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million. But we already know that the first escalation for the new policies is going to be up $1.3 million just in our risk profile. So why is this important? We're starting to create a financial case for investing in infrastructure that reduces risk and prevents hardship versus paying for insurance that doesn't modify risk and it doesn't necessarily address future development or the health of the community. And so we developed a comprehensive water management plan. Rebuild by Design was the group that produced those Vermont slides. There's a QR code in there. They produced something called an Atlas of Disaster. They do it for every single state. The statistic that stuck out for me is that Vermont had the 5th most disaster declarations. I think it was last year, behind Florida, California, New York, and New Jersey, or something like that. So if you look at like population versus geography, like I think that the state of Vermont needs to think critically about disaster recovery, and the cities themselves need to start thinking that similar to what we had to do is what does the future look like for the next 10 or 20 years? And for us, it was both financing and a capital plan that built out these strategies. Resist being physical flood walls and interventions that prevent storm surge from entering the community. Delay storm discharge. Delay being keeping water out of our stormwater management systems. Store building underground systems that connect to our wastewater management and our stormwater management features, and then discharge being active pumping. So when you have high intensity, high volume, you're using pumps to move water within the watershed away from vulnerable areas. And what does that look like on a map? So going from a high level down to a lower level, the purple lines are connecting into high points of topography to prevent storm surge from coming in. And all the green hatches, as well as the green parcels, those are actually like block areas where we're purchasing blocks and we're redeveloping them for open space and to really soak up water when we have those heavy precipitation events. You take that one step further. I was talking to Michael on the way here. There's a difference between capital planning and what you're looking at is part of our documentation for compliance with NEPA, which is National Environmental Protection Act, something. But it basically says in the eyes of the federal government, this project has met historic, environmental, cultural, like offsite impact reviews. It was a 2-year planning process. It cost like $8 million to do. And we were able to put into practice where those sites were, what we needed to do. So the red area, south side of the city, that's storm sewer modification. That's heavy construction. Same at the north end, so that if water comes up over the edge, it can drain back to the Hudson River. On the west side, the 3 purple areas and lines are where we're completely rebuilding our stormwater management system and redirecting it towards park sites with pumps. I just want to point out this site on the western side is where our housing authority is. And through the entire process, we were cognizant of we needed to protect not only the most vulnerable properties and residents, but the most vulnerable populations that we had. And so we've been working towards that end. By having an environmental review as well as hydraulic risk analysis, we were able to back into a benefit cost analysis that said for every $1 that we're spending, we're reducing risk by $4. So if you start thinking about the expenses that we've had versus the exposure to risk that we have, we're making a financial calculation to the federal government, to the state actors that says, not only does this make sense, it's the best return on your investment you can do in investing in infrastructure. When we set to redesign basically the community, we knew that we could not do it through single purpose and single utility infrastructure. If we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on catch basins and pipes and concrete curbs and all kinds of systems that have been proven but don't produce any blue sky value, we would have failed at our job. We were very, very, very cognizant that form had to meet function. And the elegant solution is something that you don't necessarily know. That when you're standing on a Resilient City Park and you're playing soccer with your kids, that you have a $30 million, 1 million gallon storage tank below your feet. And so we were very, very cognizant of what that might look like for the community. And these are just examples. We called it a toolkit. We called it an amenity toolkit. What we presented was, I'll say this now because before I show you the next slide, the community is very concerned that we're building walls that we were gonna separate them from neighborhoods. And the feedback that we got that was very specific was, do not build in front of us, do not build behind me, do not build next to me, do not build in my neighborhood, but don't leave us out from protection. And so like, what did that make? That made different coalitions. It fractured the points of consensus. Because we had already gotten to, you should do something, or maybe you should not do nothing. We were definitely there. You should do something was like, that was still, wasn't clear. So in doing that, we were very, very, very aware of, do not allow common points of dissatisfaction. That was like one of the biggest takeaways that we had, is that if there are coalitions of people that are around an idea that said, this is bad, then you've missed something in communication. And Rebuild by Design helped us with that structure. So it wasn't just me out there with the mayor, like talking to people about flood risk projects. We had the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, preeminent Dutch architecture firm, Royal Haskoning PhD, preeminent engineering firm from the Netherlands, HR&A, financial analysts from New York. They were putting together teams of people at the federal level to support local actors and not asking the question, what do we do? But trying to get agreement on what are the issues that we agree. So what that produced for us is park spaces that are elevated above grade. Harborside Park's about 4 acres. It's under construction right now, so I don't have great, like, pretty pictures of it. But in the middle of this, there is a 12-foot high T-wall that has concrete footers, bulkhead down to bedrock, sheet piling. It's a seriously engineered feature. But the way it presents itself to the community is through open space and access to the waterfront. In the area right here, there's a gate that comes across, as well as down here, there's a gate that goes across the street. And so by pushing the alignment back a little further from the waterway, we preserved access. We preserved view sheds, which were very, very important to the community, but we are also able to reduce the alignment height. So if you're on the waterfront, you're building at 20 feet above grade, 25 feet above grade. If you move it back, we're at like 12 feet above grade. And that was all confirmed from a hydraulic model that we did to look up and downstream from our community. So this is kind of what in process looks like. Under that park space, you've got a concrete footer, concrete wall, but then we produce an amenity treatment. I get some criticism for this, so people are shitting on the orange color. I like it. It's safety orange. It's the color of the Netherlands. It's the state flag from New Jersey. Like no one can agree on color. Like, so if that's where we're at, like, okay, like we'll change the color. But the idea is you can use metal, you can use wood, you can use texture. There's planting. These rolling gates are going to cross streets if there's a coastal storm surge event, but the majority of the time it's just there. And this is more of an active program. You can have passive features that work just because they're there. So what I'm trying to give you an idea of is like if the community wants to respond to adapt to flood risk, there are ways to do so without necessarily changing the character of the community, which was really important. I think that I went too far on this one. I've got a lot of feedback, but like the idea is that it doesn't have to be like something that's you can make it something that looks beautiful. This is a portion of the project that's across from the school, benches, like graphics, art, like artboard. You can put blackboards on it. And this is in an area that's kind of like a dead end street. This is again a rendering because we're in construction, but the idea is that it doesn't have to be something that creates opposition. It doesn't have to separate areas of the community. So I didn't focus heavily on the wall building piece of this because that's more related to coastal storm surge risk. And I think that we're here to talk about rainfall flood risk and what that means. And I think about it in the Winooski Valley just because that's what I'm familiar with, but flood risk profiles for river and communities. And that's our delay store discharge project. So while the seawall stuff was in planning, I was busy building. And so what we're going to see here is kind of some examples of projects that we've undertaken that have gotten us to that 90% reduction level. I think that's why Mike asked me to come speak. We had an article in the New York Times, and New York Times architecture critic calls you to discuss what you've been building, and kind of like, I thought it would be pretty bad. And he's like, no, it's good. Like, I'm pumped. Come to Columbia, talk to us about like what you're doing. Okay, thank you. So one of the tools that we had, this is going back to 2010. So like, community was already aware that we had flood risk issues. And all on the west side of the city, where is the wetlands, they started to say, we're gonna buy every one of these properties. We're gonna force them into Maine. We're gonna take over parking lots that aren't paying their taxes. It's kind of like something that takes time. And so the majority of these projects we've actually acquired and built. But like, there is a foundation that you start to build. Our communications manager, she's like, it takes a long time. Like this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The reason why I started back to like 1868 is like, I think everyone's still gonna be here in 50 years. I think all the communities in Vermont are still gonna be where they were, doing what they're doing, and figure out a way to like, to not have impacts. So we started by building our pump stations. This is our H5 pump station. It can pump 40 million gallons per day of flooding. So when you start to get into those 3, 4, 5-inch rainfall events, very, very effective. This I would consider like more traditional gray infrastructure. These pumps connect to outfalls, but they are absolutely necessary to our discharge strategy. We were able to hire a local architect for the second pump station. So when we had put the generator above our H1 pump station, we put a copper facade on it, make sure that there was some connection to the community. It's actually at the end of one of our major commercial streets. And there's also something above grade that the community can see, like that's there, that's protecting an entire neighborhood from flooding. And it kicks on like 50 times a year. So we wanted people to think about what's going on there. This was a lower cost intervention we did. We did a really just a demonstration project at City Hall. Downspout disconnect, take downspouts, put them in a cistern. Cisterns above grade, cistern waters the rain gardens. Rain gardens overflow back into the sewer system if necessary, but concrete, porous concrete, permeable pavers. We built a green roof on the ground. We're like, every drop counts. This is how you do it. We have like 3,000 people per hour during peak hour, rush hour that walk by City Hall. So Hoboken's like 60,000 people. We have like 60 to 70% commute via mass transit. So you have low impact, kind of not low impact. It was a full city block we did. So medium impact, low cost. There's less than $500,000 for us to do this. And it was the framework that was from the last presentation. It's kind of like low cost, like high impact. I forget I'm picturing that. That's why I'm presenting my stuff, not theirs. But the matrix was good. If you remember the matrix, it was like do the bottom left and then go to the bottom right, and then go to the top right and never do the top left. That was the takeaway. So the community's like, yeah, do more of this. That was good. We like green infrastructure. We want to see you respond. So we purchased an acre of property in Southwest Hoboken. The idea was surface park, subsurface storage, access for the community, and what that looks like below ground is really diverting water from roadways to the subsurface retention areas and making it so we don't have flooding on our roads during heavy rain events. And this is just kind of what it looks like now. It's just a urban park that's what I consider to be like very well utilized. And the stone treatment, those are permeable pavers too. So it's just kind of using like texture and material so that it's not an asphalt parking lot. It's not just draining off the site to another roadway. I'd be remiss if I didn't like start to talk about how we put together our financing for these projects. So some of them come from grants to seed ideas, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. There's a number of different grants at the federal level that come out. We can start to do design, start to do concept development. We use that for this project. We have an infrastructure bank in the state that funds design. If you're going to do an acquisition, if you're going to do a project development, they'll give seed money to help design. And typically our finance cost for that, we're financing like 80 cents on the dollar. So there's always like some kind of debt forgiveness portion of it. The city, like the residents, we went out to referendum. On the referendum, we said, do you want to implement a 2% tax for open space development and preservation? Exclusively, it's outside of my budget, it's not in the municipal budget. It can only be used for acquiring open space. And they said, yeah, it was like 75% of people were like, yeah, this is like pretty good, we should do this. We went back 3 years ago and added another cent on that as a referendum again, overwhelmingly more than 70% of people voted for it. So you have an open space trust fund, the infrastructure bank, some grant money. The majority of our projects are not financed through municipal taxes. The majority of our projects are financed through grant funding and the infrastructure bank and our open space trust fund. This was actually done through a redevelopment agreement. This is a 4-acre resiliency park. So Southwest Park, 200,000 gallons of subsurface storage. 7th and Jackson, 400,000 gallons. Put that in context, an Olympic swimming pool is 500,000 gallons. So it is a big volume of water to keep off the streets. Our 2 pumps are doing, combined 90 million gallons of capacity. So these projects are helpful in cutting the curve off and keeping water off the street, but they support the pumps during these heavy precipitation events to be able to keep up. They do a portion of what the pumps do. This is an example of what it looks like now, green space, lawn, but it's performing the benefits of flood risk reduction. And what's not in this picture, but what actually happens is there's a bunch of businesses that started up. Because if you have a daycare and there's open space next to your business, you can use that open space for your outdoor play area. So we're starting to see it seed economic development in other areas of the city that we didn't really have these like anticipated consequences. So the community said those were good, keep doing more. We like to see what you're producing. This is an $80 million project. We purchased the property for $30 million. It was asphalt parking lot, had to be remediated. We abandoned the right of way between, I think that this is Jefferson and Madison, so we could build the soccer field. The coolest project I ever worked on that I'm not talking about today is this building right here. We did a consolidation elevation of a substation. There's 2 substations in the floodplain. We brought them both together, elevated them, brought in medium voltage power, and we haven't had a power outage since 2019. And so that becomes, when you're talking about, can you limit the duration? Can you limit the impact? Can you limit the extent? When your business shuts down for 24 hours because you don't have power, you have to throw out your inventory. That's bad. So all the flood risk stuff is good, but doing the substation project, that we did that through a redevelopment agreement. That was like bringing the utility together, the municipality. We gave them land. We gave them, like, it just worked. It took like 6 years. We had to write a letter to the ratepayer advocate to be like, make them do this. But we got that project done. Back to this. This project was something that the community supported. They financed it. It was, again, something where you surface green infrastructure, subsurface storage. And this is also the site of our 3rd pump station, H6. It's a pivot in our tactics because we realized that separating the road and bringing it on site to the park, bringing that water under the park is good, but you need to have active pumping to manage where water is going. So I think that here specifically, that has a lot to do with velocity and scouring and overtopping banks. There are different interventions for different purposes, but the reason why I think that this project is going to be successful is that you are managing the water from the site below ground, you're managing the water off-site below ground, and then you're allowing it to move elsewhere in the watershed very quickly through the force main that we're building. This is an example of what it looks subsurface for the H6 pump station. And this is what it looked like when we were building that 1 million gallon subsurface tank. $80 million project. FEMA gave us $10 million to build this tank because the benefit cost analysis penciled out. They said, this is definitely going to work. We like what you did. We're glad that you have an environmental impact statement. How about we fund you through a program called Building Resilience in Communities? And I said, yes, thank you very much. It's a great idea. I really appreciate that extra money that we weren't anticipating. But that lowers our debt burden of the community. There's a little guy down here. It's like, I like that guy too. Because it puts into perspective how big this is. And this was, they were talking about procurement a little bit with like the domestic, buy domestic, do that. So we had a little snafu on the project. For our contractor, some of that is Portuguese steel. And the EPA was like, this is the most egregious violation we've seen. They're like, sorry. We won't finance that through you guys. We won't do it again. But pay attention because if you really want to make sure that your construction manager or your project manager is on point with that kind of stuff. But that's sheet piling down to bedrock, dewatering, well points around. The actual tank is about 10 feet below groundwater in this area. So it's a heavily engineered watertight structure that's about the size of a city block. And so we were really conscious of the fact that this is complicated. So we have shared services agreement with North Hudson Sewage Authority, who's our partner in a lot of this. And I was talking to Michael about this too. Many, almost all of our projects, we have married water quality impacts with water quantity impacts. So water quality is like EPA. Water quality is like algal blooms in Lake Champlain. Water quantity is FEMA, and that's like homes getting washed away. So they have money to deal with these issues. It's all the same water, just different context and who's thinking about using it. So many of our projects are state revolving loan fund, which is EPA, FEMA, which is hazard mitigation. But because we're partnered with our sewage authority provider, you're providing clean water benefits with this. This is keeping 1 million gallons of sewage or contaminated water out of the Hudson River. That's good for the EPA. It's only when we start to use the pump that it's bad. So the pumps are a great short-term solution, but not a practical long-term solution for us if we have to hit our EPA consent order. But yeah, go play soccer, have a beer. Like it's under a park space that's durable during blue sky and durable during black spot. And what that looks like for us, this is actually a little bit different practice. I don't know if you guys have seen like high density polyethylene piping. It's just like basic, you can lay it down anywhere. We use that as the void space, and we created another 500,000 gallons of storage underneath the soccer field by using like high aggregate crushed run gravel HDPE piping, and water goes there instead of onto our city streets. This is a basketball court we sunk. So the basketball court itself is below the curb edge of the surrounding park. So you have inlets from the roadways that drain into the basketball court. Basketball court's connected to green infrastructure. So you're creating basically like a pool during storm events because it's better to have this flood than it is those cars that are sitting on the roadway. Something we're really proud of is our Vision Zero program. So these are curb bump outs that have green infrastructure in them. We've got epoxy treatments on intersections, visible crosswalks. This is actually a big thing, these daylighting poles, so people can't park there, so pedestrians can like see what's going on, drivers can see pedestrians. Hoboken hasn't had a traffic fatality in 7 years. And so this is another example of like transportation issue, stormwater issue. Let's build them together. We're bringing different sources of funding into a project and working collaboratively. And this is just kind of an aerial shot. It looks much nicer now, or not right now because we're in mud season like you guys are, but as this matures and as it has matured, you can start to see the plantings establish themselves. This is our third pump station. This is H6 right here, where we built it with the sewage authority. We actually gave our sewage authority like that site. We were like, go ahead and build it. Screwed our contractor, we're behind by like 6 months. Can't do anything about it now. I'm not gonna like go after them for liquidated damages, but like if you're doing joint projects like that can happen. We continue to expand those policies. So we have all those green hatches you saw from our original plan. We're doing curb extension bump outs and rain gardens on our roads. This is part of our capital program to separate the storm sewer. So making sure that we have water specific areas to go. This is water quality treatment. The pipes are a little oversized for water quantity conveyance. This is one of the little blue circle on the left. That's cool. There's a big hole there. I don't think anyone's really interested. That's our second ward councilwoman. She was on site every single day, like monitoring the project and sending me pictures. It was like the best construction manager I've ever but she was excited about the project and happy to see us be successful. Since Sandy, we've done like 1 million square feet of green roofs, try and capture water before it goes into the system, lowers albedo in the community, reduce urban heat island effect. And we've had to pivot on our maintenance strategies because like someone's gotta maintain it. We didn't do a great job like to start. So now we have training, we have staff that does it, we have contractors, we have shared services. These are North Hudson guys cleaning out some of the rain gardens. One of the things they'll do for us is they'll go subsurface if we have cisterns or storage anywhere and they'll clean those things out for us. We have a youth training program, a volunteer, like an Earth Day kind of thing, get people out, help us weed, make sure the plantings are in good shape, and then we do use contractors, and some of this stuff is expensive to maintain. There's no way around having that conversation. What I think is interesting though, is like what we've done is with our bond bank, we've started to, it's called capitalizing establishment costs. It just means the contractor pays to maintain it for 2 years. They plant something, they're taking care of it, means you don't have to go out and replace trees if they die or like if the plants are dying. It's kind of a unique way of packaging the finance, but like we found to be pretty effective and eligible for the state financing. This is just an example of a direction that we're heading in. Again, we're going to cap site, release our discharge practice, programming and engagement. This is the process we go through, present design alternatives, focus on 2 alternatives, and then actually go to construction on a preferred alternative. This is another 1 acre site that we're in the process of bidding. And what we do with our designers is we're building out physical models that we bring out and put in the neighborhoods that are going to be constructing these practices. This is that same kind of surface, subsurface. We're going to be putting a pump there. This connects to 7th and Jackson Resiliency Park. This is the existing Block 12 Southwest Park. We're buying the acre next to it. Put pickleball courts there as an asphalt parking lot. Designing it underneath stormwater management again, and then ultimately presenting that back to the community. The reason why, and I'm going to go into a little case study with this project, the reason why I think that this one's interested is that we had 5 different sources of funding for this project. And I think that we're at a point right now where 0 of them were municipal bonds. So Open Space Trust Fund being a big one, iBank Principal for Forgiveness being a big one. Green Acres is similar to, it's a state-funded project to support open space development and green infrastructure. And the reason why I show this pie is that you may have goals that you're not sure how to finance, but sometimes it's good to have a vision and back into how to finance these projects. We received like $6 million on a $12 million project from FEMA for the development of this project. Just a harp on benefit cost analysis. So is every dollar we're spending reduce risk by $1? Yes. It's a bunch of jargony stuff, but I just like seeing the 1+ at the bottom. That's important. This is what I just talked about a minute ago, providing site maintenance 2 years complete. That means that your guys aren't having to do it. You're not having to hire a different contractor. It's the person who built it. It's likely the contractor. They're not able to subcontract the stuff out. And I think I'm going to wrap up here, like a couple little tidbits for you guys to all think about. We've been measuring precipitation intensity and precipitation accumulation since 2016, when our second pump station came online. This up here is Hurricane Ida. So the blue is rainfall amount, 6.5 inches. Peak 15 minutes intensity is 4.3 inches. So I think this last summer you guys had something crazy like 6 or 12 inches of rain over a 1-day period. I can't manage this. That's past, that's avoid, evacuate, that's take protective measures and make sure you're not putting your material people in harm's way. What we can do is mostly address this. So if you want to look at this a different way, this is a scatter plot of every tidal surge event and rainfall event over like the last 100 years for the city of Hoboken. And what you start to see is that this is Hurricane Sandy, 11-foot storm surge. Hurricane Floyd, 5 inches of water. This is Hurricane Ida up there somewhere between 7.5 and 8. This is really tough. This is This is where you're like, we need to avoid impacts in this area. And that's a difficult conversation. In here, between 4 and 5 inches of rainfall, at least for us, what we're able to manage, that's, you may have some flooding, but let's be prepared. Let's have sandbags, let's have deployable flood measures. If you need to, like, we have barricade programs that shut down streets before we have flooding. I missed that point in one of the earlier slides. And then all of this is, let's create a reasonable expectation that we're gonna address that. Let's work to resolve those issues. And I think that a lot of this information, especially in Vermont, is available. Like, they've been keeping historic records on rain. You guys are like probably way on point with that, probably more so than New Jersey, because you have more farmers here, but like, this is information you can get, and you can start to right size what you think what you're trying to resolve, and then what the right investments are, different areas. So I'll go back to, 4-part water management strategy. You saw a lot of different examples of how we're doing that. We're adjusting risk, 90% of rainfall, 90% of storm surge. There's kind of a point where it is overwhelming to think about where to start or where to begin. And so what I like to say is, Desmond Tutu said, like, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is like 1 bite at a time. And by my math, at 4 pounds a day, you could eat an elephant in like 8 years.
Oh.
So by the time our projects are done, we'll have eaten 2 elephants. And so I guess like that's 16 years time. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, but if there's points of either common dissatisfaction or a directive from the community to get started, like I suggest everyone like get to work. And I just want to say again, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak. I thank you for the invitation. I hope I didn't suck, and I appreciate that one time. So thank you very much. It's not me. There's huge teams of people. Yeah. Thank you.
Take the first one. I'm curious, I really have 1,000 questions, but 3 main questions. One on site acquisition, was that mostly
Local.
did you have to resort to eminent domain at all? Okay.
It definitely impacted the negotiations. We exercised eminent domain for a number of private property acquisitions for like easements. So like we needed temporary construction easements, permanent easements. Some of them were extremely contentious. Some of them were not. Some of them were hostile. Some of them were not. But we were able to resolve most of them without actual like condemnation proceedings and going before a judge and going before that process. Just because there's a reason why we're doing it. We were doing it for a public purpose. We were doing it within the framework of a project, but we tried to steer clear of private property. I mean, most of everything you saw today is done in municipal right of way. So I think that something like 30 or 40% of our entire community is municipal property. So that's where we chose to like focus our effort.
And then the other question I had was Jersey City is right across the river, I guess on the west side. Part of your strategy is to pump water out into existing waterways, and I wonder if you could just speak to what those discussions are like and how what they do impacts you and vice versa.
Sure. So the difference in internal to Hoboken, we have a riverine watershed. External to Hoboken, the Hudson River is tidally influenced. So displacement doesn't work the same way and outside of our watershed that it does in the Winooski Valley. So that, in that case, like you almost have to do pumping back either parallel to the watershed or back upstream. It's not as simple of an answer. Like not all the practices that I discussed here are going to be applicable in the watershed here, but what I hope is that the takeaway, like there's a huge landscape of what is possible if you kind of get started. You wanna
Go ahead. Yeah, it's like,
Jersey City's fine. they're like, you guys are weird, we're not worried about this. I'm like, okay.
Okay, almost follow up on that last thing you just said. First of all, thanks. I'm just amazing overlap with, I think, a lot of the stuff that you deal with. The problem with watersheds, grading, mountains is that we're dealing with like an insane amount of power.
Yeah.
Water power and an insane amount of sediment. So any infrastructure that is there has to be like either, like
It's
it's
super
almost,
hardcore.
yeah, it's almost, yeah, all that has to be. So, and floodplains, which are like the prime land for ag, a lot of other things, flash.
Sure.
So there's barriers that we have, or in Vermont, that are not here. There's probably more
Similar.
control. And I'm just wondering how you, if you can reflect on that in terms of strategy.
So, in my process of developing, like, I have a certified floodplain manager, so FEMA 480 has recommendations for modification, really like riverine best practices. And many of the cases, I think it's gonna be identifying what's tolerant versus not tolerant, what's suitable or not suitable, and allowing the water to go where it wants to go. Like hardening against scouring, reducing the amount of channeling it may require, discussing like the purpose and need for dam projects, and really like, how much have you modified the existing water course? How much have you encroached on the existing floodplain? And what are the appropriate uses with the knowledge that, is this gonna get worse? Is it not gonna get worse? Is it gonna keep continuing at the frequency? Sell your fish stocks or Sesame Street stocks?
Fish.
Fish. It's not a build your way out of this problem question. It's a conversation in community values, and it's really a grieving process to go through that. Because it's tough. It's tough conversations that relate to like who people are. Like, I'm sure families have identities, where they're just their land, their property. My grandparents lived here, my great grandparents lived here, like. That's tough. Well, if your your house floods 2 times in one season, like, is that sustainable financially, physically? Like, it's a complicated process, but yeah, it's a conversation for sure.
I'm thinking one of the ways in which you eat that elephant, and is the lesson for me in all this, there's not as much to do with, creating a defense against floods. But it has to do with being able to explain the project to others in ways that they understand, because one of the byproducts is a much more beautiful, cohesive town, which when along the way you built amenities, and so you had other people see the benefits in this, and that they have no idea how this works or what it is, but when they see the other benefit of the project. And that for me is a lesson, because if I'm trying to have a project, it isn't necessarily just a project and, the efficiency of the town around the town development. It's the other things that people see along the way that help create the enthusiasm and maintain that enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So that for me is the biggest takeaway to this. And I don't know how you started out in the beginning knowing this.
I think that it was mostly we started out and headed in this direction because of how frustrated and upset people were. Like, it was, not only did you, as a member of government, not only did you fail us in letting us flood and having to be evacuated by the National Guard, you failed us by not having a strategy how to deal with this. And you failed us by presenting alternatives that modify the community in a way that we don't want. So it was like, you think you head in a direction and then you're wrong. And, you bring in experts and they're wrong. And the community is like, definitely don't do nothing, but like, what do we do? And what it came down to was, we need projects that perform during blue and black sky. Like, that was kind of or a wall is not a wall, is like that was kind of the takeaway that came out of it. And I happen to like really be concerned about like urban aesthetic, or like the experience of a community from the eyes of the pedestrian, a cyclist. Like, I've moved away from upstate New York because I was disappointed with like car architecture and I thought that their communities were better because of historic preservation or because of different things that made them unique to them. And so we said, we need to emphasize that and not just cast that aside. And Hoboken is a unique place that I no longer live because I think that it's tough to live and work in the same place. So like I live out of town, right? But it allows me to detach a little bit, but I did live there for like 10 years while we were going through this and it's intense.
You cited a figure there on your kind of cost benefit. You said that for every dollar you invest, you're avoiding digging $4.
That was for the storm surge. Storm surge is more impactful, lower probability, high consequence, so that we can spend a little more money to reduce that risk. The rainfall flood risk benefit cost analysis is always closer to like 1-to-1. That same group, Rebuild by Design, in an urban environment is looking at it like 2-to-1. But I don't know like how that pencils out because you have to have higher population density or like more critical facilities at risk. And in riverine environments, usually it's much more like disparate. Like there's roads or there's like single family buildings and sometimes it doesn't always work out.
Yeah, I was mostly interested in that from the standpoint of like that finding that you could get the project financed.
Right.
What is the acceptance or like, receptivity of financiers to that type of a?
It's actually not a finance question, it's a threshold question. Because the federal government or state government, they're not gonna put hazard mitigation money. So whether it's coming through FEMA, community development, block grants, disaster recovery funds, whether it's going through our state office of emergency management, if you're not building something that's gonna defray risk by $1, like that's not a project they're interested in helping you. So then that completely changes our financing pool and it kind of goes back to like traditional municipal bonds or less, I think, attractive funding mechanisms. So those are actually projects that are like, we have a whole list of things that we're like not really approaching because we're focusing on, addressing those flood risk projects first so we can create more projects and achieve. I think maybe one more question. I gave everyone a lot of time. I'm starting to see like everyone's like, all right. Go ahead.
I was really interested in those last couple of slides where you're looking at, what kind of storms would these interventions meant to address? And there was, those other sections of like more intense, more sort of high volume events. And I'm just wondering if the communities or maybe not the community, but the folks who are working on these projects are starting to have conversations about like, great, these projects are gonna handle those 4 or 5 inch events. Those might be more frequent, this can still handle that. But those more extreme events that are also gonna start to become more frequent, I'm wondering if this has helped kick off a conversation about those more extreme events.
It definitely has, and so we're very conscious of how we message. And part of the message is like, you need to evacuate. Like you still have to have an evacuation plan. We're still administering our codes to the International Construction Code or to 2 feet above the flood. You still have to anticipate there being risk, even if our interventions are successful. And I think that there's an example in New York City, like people that didn't evacuate basement apartments died. And like these are like grave. Like we're dealing with issues that are, I think, serious, and water's gonna do what water does. You can only manage it to a certain point, and then you have to have conversations of, we will provide you the best available information as we see it, and like, we need to plan accordingly. Those are all individual choices, but we try to just stay on here's the best that we can anticipate, but you may need to evacuate.
Okay, well, we're gonna give, Caleb's gonna be around, we're gonna give him a chance to eat, well, I just wanna thank him again, first of all, let's go. He's gonna be around, we have, let's see here, we're gonna recircle back up in 25 minutes, so kind of an opportunity to stretch your legs, get some coffee, we've got extra cookies in the back, and around 1:50, we're gonna start talking about what's going on in Vermont regarding.
Yeah, when they did, their first year, huge